I was 17 the night my parents called abandonment freedom, though at that point I did not have a name for what it felt like. All I knew was that I was sitting at our kitchen table in suburban Michigan staring at a bowl of overcooked pasta while my mom and dad beamed at each other like they were the heroes of a movie only they understood. They had set the table like it was some kind of celebration, but it was really a stage they had built for themselves. My mom wore a silk blouse that still had a store tag tucked under the collar. My dad had already pulled up the flight itinerary on his phone 3 times just to admire it. They were leaving for the United Kingdom for a whole month, and they were about to call it a lesson for me. When my mom leaned across the table, her perfume sharp and floral, she pressed her fingers under my chin and forced my face upward. "Look at me when I talk to you," she said with that smile she used whenever she wanted to sound warm, but ended up sounding victorious. "Try to act mature for once." Her grip on my chin was tighter than it needed to be strong enough that I felt the pressure long after she let go. My dad set something on the table in front of me. The sound was hard and flat like a bill being thrown at a cashier. $15. A 5 and a 10 curled at the corners. The money looked small even before I understood how long it was supposed to last. "There you go," he said, the way someone might toss scraps to a dog. "Emergency money. Make it stretch." I stared at the bills. $15 for 30 days. My mom lifted her wine glass, swirling the liquid. "It is time, Emily. Time to prove you can handle yourself." They kept using the word freedom like they were giving me a gift instead of responsibilities they had spent years refusing to teach me. "Do not make us regret giving you freedom," my mom added, her tone light, but her words carrying the weight of a warning. "What about food?" I asked before I could stop myself. My voice sounded small even to me. My mom laughed, actually laughed. "Starving teaches responsibility." My dad chuckled like she had just made the funniest joke of the night. When I reached for my phone to check the bus schedule, my dad leaned over and yanked it out of my hand with a sudden violent motion that made the fork on my plate jump. "You do not need that," he said. "You need to learn." He placed it face down on the counter like I was an addict who needed to be cut off. They talked for the rest of dinner about museums and afternoon tea and hotels with marble floors, while I sat there trying to figure out how many meals $15 could buy. I kept waiting for one of them to look at me, really look, but they never did. The next morning, the driveway was wet from an early drizzle, making the world look colder than it really was. My mom wheeled her suitcase out the door without even glancing back. My dad locked the front door from the outside, something that had always felt strange, but tonight felt suffocating. No hug, no instructions, not even a moment of hesitation. They climbed into the rideshare car, talking excitedly about the restaurants they planned to try overseas. The door slammed shut, and just like that, I was alone. I leaned my forehead against the glass for a moment, breathing into the quiet. The air inside the house felt heavy and stale, like no one was supposed to live here. I turned to go upstairs, and that was when I saw it. A tiny glint of black tucked into the top corner of my bedroom doorway. At first, I thought it was a screw. Then the lens caught the light. A miniature camera. My stomach tightened. I stepped into my room, and that was when I saw the second one on the opposite wall, positioned to watch me from another angle. I stood still, feeling the slow rise of panic start beneath my ribs. They had not trusted me to survive, but they had trusted themselves to watch. They wanted the footage. They wanted the control. This was not freedom. This was monitoring disguised as a lesson. I waved a hand in front of one camera. The tiny device clicked as it refocused. My throat tightened. I imagined my mom watching this from a hotel room sipping tea and criticizing my posture. I imagined my dad replaying clips to look for mistakes he could lecture me about. They had not just left me. They had left me under surveillance. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up the $15, and felt the house tilt around me. It was not the emptiness that scared me. It was the intention. They wanted me to struggle. They wanted me to fail in a way they could later point to and say, "We tried to teach her." I stood in the center of the living room, listening to the soft, mechanical hum of the cameras repositioning themselves as I moved. Every sound felt amplified, the ticking of the clock, the faint knock of the furnace, even my own breath. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to force the panic down. They did not leave me alone. They left me locked inside a test I never asked for. When the door clicked shut behind me and the house settled into its new shape without them, silence did not arrive gently. It hit in a wave thick and cold, filling every hallway and corner like fog that would not lift. I walked into the kitchen, telling myself to breathe, to act normal, to pretend this was temporary, but my footsteps sounded too loud, like the house wanted me to hear how empty it was now. I opened the refrigerator, hoping maybe I had misremembered how little food was left, but the light inside revealed everything at once. A quarter bottle of milk already sour, half a stick of butter with a grayish tint, a container of salad that had wilted into a brown mushy mass, 3 condiments that had no business being considered food. The emptiness was almost theatrical, as if my parents had curated it to match the lesson they claimed they were teaching. On the freezer shelf sat a single bag of frozen vegetables that had crystallized into one solid block. I closed the door slowly, as if the contents might disappear further if I moved too fast. On the counter was a note my mom had left in her looping handwriting that always made me feel like she was signing a contract rather than communicating with me. Make smart choices. The words felt like barbed wire disguised as encouragement. I turned the debit card over in my hand, the same one my dad had proudly announced would teach me financial responsibility. It looked normal, shiny and blue, as if it had any real purpose. I tried activating it again, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed the numbers on my phone. Declined. I tried again. Declined. The app suggested contacting the primary account holder, but I already knew that reaching them was not just unlikely, it was unwelcome. They would not answer. They never answered when they wanted distance. I refreshed the bank app until the spinning circle felt like a taunt. They had not left me with a safety net. They had left me with a prop, something they could point to later and say we provided for her. I scrolled through their social media accounts, something I usually avoided, but I needed to know where they were in the world that apparently needed them more than I did. They had already posted their first photo standing in front of a stone building in London. My dad captioned it, "Finally free from responsibilities." My mom commented with heart emojis. I stared at the words until they blurred. I had never realized how easily a sentence could stab. I opened a notebook I kept in my desk, the one I usually used for school assignments, and wrote in all caps at the top of a fresh page, "Evidence log." Under it, I wrote, Day 1, parents gone, food nearly gone, debit card inactive, no check-ins, silence. Writing steadied something inside me, something small but still alive. If they wanted to turn my life into an experiment, then I would turn theirs into documentation. I would not let myself disappear in the silence. I opened 2 more notebooks labeling them food log and emotion log because I knew that the details mattered. People listened to details. People believed what was recorded. As the hours passed, the house grew colder, even though the thermostat remained steady. It was the kind of cold that did not come from temperature, but from absence. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat on the couch, letting the quiet seep into my bones. I realized that for the first time in a long time, there was no one here to criticize where I sat, how I breathed, whether my posture made me look lazy. The relief lasted about 30 seconds before the fear replaced it. Freedom was not supposed to feel like waiting for something terrible to happen. I turned on the television for noise, but the voices from the sitcoms felt too bright, too cheerful, like they belonged in someone else's life. I turned it off again and sat in the darkening room. Somewhere above me, I heard a faint mechanical click. I looked up. One of the cameras had moved. I stood so quickly the blanket fell to the floor. I walked upstairs slowly, almost tiptoeing, even though there was no one here to hear me. In my bedroom, the small black camera sat still again, expressionless but watching. I felt heat rising in my face, the humiliation of being supervised like a lab rat in a glass box. I lifted my phone and switched to the video camera. Day 2. I whispered, my voice barely audible. I held the camera up to my face. My skin looked pale and dry, my eyes slightly hollow from the stress of a single night alone. I said the words, slowly afraid that saying them quickly would make me sound dramatic or childish. I am still alone. There is almost no food. The card does not work. They have not checked on me. I paused, swallowing against the tightness in my throat. If anyone ever sees this, it means things got worse. I saved the recording and placed my phone face down on the bed. The silence returned instantly, thick and unbroken. I lay back on the mattress and stared at the ceiling. The house creaked occasionally, but not enough to make me feel less alone. I felt fear rising again, then anger, then fear again. Emotional undulation, my counselor at school called it once, though. I never imagined it would become the rhythm of my days. As the second night settled in, I realized something painful and unmistakably true. I was not scared of being alone. I was scared because they wanted me to fail. By day 5, the hunger was no longer a feeling, but a sound, a constant dull roar in my head that made every movement feel like lifting something too heavy. It started as small things at first, the kind of discomfort you convince yourself is normal. A faint buzzing in my ears, a shaky feeling in my legs, a fog in my thoughts that made simple tasks feel like puzzles. Then it grew louder, more insistent, demanding attention the way a fire alarm does, even when you are trying to pretend nothing is wrong. I stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, staring at the pantry as if the cans inside might magically multiply if I looked desperate enough. There were 2 cans of soup left. They looked harmless, almost hopeful in their bright labels, but the problem was obvious. The can opener had broken weeks ago, and my dad had never bothered to replace it. Normally, we ordered takeout or microwaved meals anyway, but now I was trapped in a house full of things I could not access. I held one can in my hands, feeling the weight of it, wondering if other 17-year-olds knew how to open food without tools. I grabbed a kitchen knife that was sharper than I remembered and pressed the tip into the metal lid. It slipped immediately. The blade skidded across the surface and sliced straight into the side of my hand before I understood what had happened. The sting came a second later, sharp and electric. Blood spilled down my wrist, bright against my skin, dripping onto the open notebook on the counter. The red smeared across the page, turning my handwriting into a streaked warning. Evidence log now had a new entry written in blood, whether I wanted it or not. I grabbed a paper towel, pressing it against the wound, feeling the pulse under my palm. My breath came short and quick. I told myself to stay calm, that it was not deep, that I would handle it. The house responded by groaning softly as though it disagreed. Above me, there was a tiny mechanical shift, a click, then another. I looked up at the doorway and saw the camera adjusting itself, the lens tilting slightly toward the kitchen. The sound made my stomach twist harder than the hunger. I watched it watching me. I stepped back, pressing the towel harder against my palm as a cold thought settled in my mind. They would not see the blood as danger. They would see it as drama, as inconvenience, as something they could use later to blame me for being careless. I lifted my phone with my free hand, the screen smudged with fingerprints and the faintest trace of crimson. I opened my email and typed a message to my mom. It was short because I did not have the energy for anything more. I cut my hand trying to open food. "Can you send money for a bandage?" I hovered a moment before sending it. My hand trembled. I wiped the sweat from my upper lip with the back of my wrist. For a moment, I let myself imagine she might respond with concern. That she might ask, "Are you okay?" Or, "Is it deep?" Or, "Should I call someone?" The reply came 7 minutes later. I did not even have time to sit down. "Stop acting hurt. You are being dramatic." My knees weakened. The hunger in my body roared louder. My fingers tightened around the phone. I felt something like heat rising in my chest, not from pain, not even from fear, but from something heavier, something poisonous. Anger. Under the message was a picture. A selfie from a restaurant in Bath. My mom was holding a glass of wine. My dad was visible in the corner, smiling as if this was the happiest moment of his year. I stared at the photo so long that the brightness hurt my eyes. I realized they did not want to hear from me unless it confirmed their version of the story, the one where they were the brave parents teaching their daughter a valuable lesson. I set the phone on the counter and reached for the nearest notebook again. The letters shook as I wrote them, but they still formed the truth I needed to see on paper. Day 5, cut hand. Almost passed out. No help, no money. No response, except blame. Behind me, the camera clicked a second time, adjusting like it wanted a better angle. I felt suddenly watched in a way that made my skin crawl. I remembered flashes of the past that still made me flinch. My father slamming a report card down and saying, "You cry because you failed, or you failed because you cry." My mother grabbing my wrist so hard her nails left marks and saying, "Stop making everything about you." I had spent years trying to shrink myself to avoid upsetting them, but here I was, bleeding in a silent kitchen because I had finally run out of ways to be small. I lifted my phone again and pressed record. My voice shook, but it still came out. If anyone sees this, I did not do this to myself. I held the camera close enough for the lens to catch the blood still seeping through the towel. I wanted there to be proof. Proof that I was not exaggerating. Proof that the hunger was real, that the danger was real, that the silence was not peaceful, but punishing. When I stopped recording, the house felt even quieter than before. My stomach growled loudly, echoing in the empty space. I wiped my tears with the back of my wrist because crying felt like a waste of energy. As I stood there, shaking my jaw clenched so hard it hurt, I understood something I had not been ready to face on the earlier days. This was not neglect by accident. This was neglect by design. And someday, somehow, someone would need to see exactly what they had chosen to do, because if they were watching through those cameras, then I would make sure they never forgot what they saw. I whispered into the stillness, "If you are watching me starve, then you are choosing it." On day 6, the betrayal did not arrive as a scream or a threat or even a new wound. It arrived through a device designed to connect people, except my parents had never used it that way with me. I was sitting on the kitchen floor with my back against the refrigerator trying to stop my hands from shaking when the screen of my phone lit up with an incoming video call. My heart lurched before my logic caught up. They were calling. For 1 second, a foolish thread of hope pulled tight in my chest. Maybe they sensed something was wrong. Maybe they felt guilty. Maybe they remembered they had a daughter. I wiped my face, quickly pushed my hair back, and answered. The image that filled the screen was not panic or worry. It was a restaurant with marble floors and dim chandeliers. People behind them were dressed in expensive coats, laughing as waiters carried plates of food that looked like art. My parents sat at a small round table. Wine glasses raised their smiles, broad and unburdened. My mom leaned in first, adjusting the angle so that the background framing their luxury was perfect. "Look, Emily," she said with the tone of someone sharing exciting news. "We are having dinner in London." Finally, my dad chimed in before I could speak. "Reservations here are impossible." "But your mother insisted." He winked at her like they were newlyweds on a honeymoon instead of parents who had left their child hungry and bleeding. I felt the hunger twist inside me again, but now it had a sharpness, a painful edge that cut deeper than the knife had. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my voice. "I hurt my hand," I said. "I tried to open food and I cut myself. I thought maybe." Before I even finished, my mom sighed dramatically. "Emily, please do not start. We are trying to enjoy our evening." "Enjoy their evening." The words echoed like a taunt. I held the phone closer as if I could force them to see me. "I need money for a bandage. The card you left does not work." My dad took a slow sip of his wine, then set the glass down with a satisfied exhale. "You are 17, Emily. You will live." His tone was the same one he used when dismissing everything from my emotions to my report cards. My mom reached for her fork, twirling a bite of pasta that probably cost more than the $15 they had left for me to last a month. "You cannot touch our food budget," she said. "It is for the trip, not you. Not you." The words carved themselves into me. I pressed my wrapped hand against my chest because for a moment I felt like I might not stay upright. I tried to say something else, maybe a plea, or maybe the truth that I was starving, but my throat closed around the words. Instead, I whispered, "I have not eaten a real meal in days." My dad glanced away from the camera to admire a dessert tray another table had ordered. Then he looked back at me with a smile that made my stomach sink. "Emily, we talked about this. Responsibility, independence. You cannot rely on us forever." My vision blurred for a moment. The chandelier lights behind them sparkled in a way that felt cruel. They were thousands of miles away, eating a meal that would be cleared and replaced without a second thought while I was sitting on a cold kitchen floor with a bloody towel and a stomach that felt like it was folding in on itself. I felt my voice crack as I whispered, "I need help." My mom's face hardened instantly. "Do not start with dramatics. We will check the cameras later. Just behave." Cameras. Not me. Cameras. My dad laughed at something on the menu, then added without looking at me, "And do not touch anything expensive." The call ended with the clink of wine glasses. The screen went dark. I stared at my reflection for a long time. My eyes looked hollow, my skin pale, my hair sticking slightly to my forehead from stress. I set the phone down gently because it felt like if I moved too quickly, something inside me would shatter. The betrayal hit slowly, a delayed impact that spread through my chest until I could not tell whether I wanted to cry or scream. They had not called to check on me. They had called to show me the life they chose instead. A life where they smiled without me, ate without me, toasted without me, lived without me. I stood up slowly, gripping the counter for balance as the room swayed slightly. I walked to the sink and ran cold water over my face, hoping it would calm the pressure behind my eyes. It did not. I looked at the camera above the doorway. I wondered if they would watch this moment later, maybe as entertainment, maybe as proof that their experiment was working. I whispered to the unblinking lens, "You are not worried about me. You are annoyed I exist." Saying it out loud made the truth settle heavier in the room. The buzzing in my ears grew louder. My whole body felt like static. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor again, pulling my knees to my chest. The cold tiles pressed against my skin, grounding me in a way nothing else had today. The hunger pulsed, the cut throbbed, the cameras watched, the silence returned. This time, it did not feel empty. It felt like it was taking sides, and it was not mine. The night I collapsed did not begin with pain. It began with the kind of exhaustion that feels like sinking slowly into water inch by inch until you realize too late that you cannot breathe. By day 7, my body no longer felt like something solid. It was a collection of shaky parts held together by stubbornness and fear. I moved through the house like someone sleepwalking, aware of my arms and legs, but not fully connected to them. The hunger had grown into something monstrous, a gnawing inside me that did not fade even when I lay still. My head throbbed with a dull pressure, and sometimes the edges of the room blurred as if I were looking through smeared glass. I tried to ignore it. I tried to pretend I was stronger than the emptiness swallowing me, but pretending does not fill a stomach or stop a body from failing. It was close to midnight when I stood up from the couch, planning to get a glass of water. The simple act felt monumental. My knees wobbled. My vision flickered. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself, but my hand slipped. I told myself to breathe, to focus, to stay upright. Instead, I felt a sudden wave of dizziness crash over me, tilting the floor at an angle my body could not understand. I reached for the counter, fingers brushing the edge, but my grip never found it. The world dropped out beneath me. My head struck the bottom corner of the pantry door with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent kitchen. A white flash burst behind my eyes. Then darkness washed over me, thick and absolute. When consciousness returned, it did not return gently. It seeped in slowly like cold water creeping under a closed door. I opened my eyes to find myself lying on the kitchen tile. My cheek pressed against the floor, the cold sinking straight into my skin. For a moment, I could not remember where I was or why I was there. Then the pain arrived. My skull throbbed in time with my heartbeat. The room spun lazily like it was trying to shrug me off. I tried to push myself upright, but my arms trembled violently under my weight. A soft, mechanical whirring sound drifted down from above. I froze. The camera in the corner of the ceiling rotated its tiny lens, adjusting until it settled directly on me. A faint click followed crisp in the stillness. They were watching. They were watching me, lying on the floor alone, bleeding, shaking. And yet no one was coming. I do not know why this was the moment that broke something in me. Maybe it was the contrast between their distant luxury and my body on a cold kitchen floor. Maybe it was the realization that even technology designed to capture danger would not be used to help me. They would see it later and call it dramatics. They always found ways to make my pain an inconvenience instead of a warning. I rolled onto my side, pressing a hand to the back of my head. My fingers came away slightly damp. Not a lot of blood, but enough to remind me how fragile the situation had become. I tried to stand again, bracing myself against the counter, and somehow managed to get upright, though the room continued to tilt unpredictably. I needed help. My body was telling me that in ways I could no longer ignore. I grabbed my phone with hands that felt too heavy, scrolling through my contacts. I hovered over the emergency call button. My mind spun. What if calling for help got me in trouble? What if they blamed me for overreacting? What if they found a way to twist this into disobedience? Those fears had been trained into me over years, threads woven into my reflexes. I closed the screen without calling. My head throbbed harder, punishing me for hesitating. I opened my email instead. It felt safer, less dramatic, less likely to be seen as betrayal. I typed 3 different messages to my parents and deleted them all. Finally, I wrote a single sentence. "Are you checking the cameras?" I hit send. There was no reply. Minutes passed. The silence did what silence always does. It filled in the truth they refused to say out loud. "I am not coming and you are on your own." I slid back down to the floor, my energy drained from even this small effort. My breathing came shallow and uneven, not quite panic, not quite despair, but something in between. I reached for the notebook I had left nearby earlier, dragging it toward me. My hand shook as I flipped to a blank page. My writing slanted unevenly as I forced the words out. Day 7. I collapsed, hit my head. No food, no help. Then I paused before adding the final sentence. They want to watch, not help. Seeing it written made my chest tighten. The truth was no longer something I could push away or excuse. They had locked me inside this house and called it a lesson. They had pointed cameras at me and called it parenting. They had left me with hunger and fear and called it independence. My vision blurred again, and I leaned my head back against the cabinet, letting my eyes close for a moment. I told myself not to fall asleep, not after hitting my head, not when my body felt like it was slipping in and out of itself. But exhaustion pulled at me like gravity. Before my eyes shut completely, I whispered into the darkness of the room. They want me to survive, enough to blame me, but not enough to need them. And then the silence answered again. This time, it felt like it was swallowing me whole. The morning after I collapsed felt unreal, as if my body were a fragile object someone had dropped and then hurriedly glued back together. I woke on the kitchen floor with a sour taste in my mouth, the overhead light buzzing faintly above me like an irritated insect. My head throbbed in pulses, and when I pushed myself upright, a wave of nausea rolled through me so strongly I had to grip the counter to stay steady. I kept telling myself to get up to move to pretend I was fine, because pretending had always been the safest version of survival, but my limbs felt heavy and disconnected like they belonged to someone else. I tried to stand fully, but ended up sliding down again, breath shaking. The hunger made my body shake more violently than fear ever had. I pressed my forehead to my knees, whispering to myself, "Just breathe, just breathe." But the air felt thick and uncooperative. That was when I heard it, a knock at the side door. Not loud, not impatient, a gentle, curious tapping. My heart jumped, but my body stayed frozen. I did not know whether to hide or answer or pray the person would go away before I embarrassed myself further. The knock came again, followed by a soft voice. "Emily, sweetheart, are you all right?" It was Mrs. Henderson, the 75-year-old widow who lived next door. She had lived in that house longer than I had been alive. She watered her garden every morning and waved at everyone on the street, whether they waved back or not. Hearing her voice felt like sunlight slipping under a locked door. I crawled toward the entryway, gripping the floor like the house might shake me off. When I reached the door, I pulled it open only an inch, the chain still latched. She gasped when she saw me. Her eyes swept over my pale skin, the dried blood on my hand, the bruise forming near my temple. "Honey, what happened to you?" Her voice cracked just a little enough that I felt something loosen inside me. I tried to open the door all the way, but the keypad lock beeped angrily when I touched it. I fumbled with the numbers, but my fingers shook too much to hit the right sequence. The screen flashed red. Locked. I had forgotten that my parents had changed the code before they left, claiming it was for safety, but never giving me the new one. I pressed my head against the doorframe and whispered, "I cannot open it." They changed the code. Mrs. Henderson leaned closer, her expression shifting from worry to alarm. Locked inside. Oh, sweetheart, that is not right. She reached for her phone as if instinct told her to call for help, but I panicked and shook my head. Please do not. I whispered, my voice thinning out. They will get angry. She paused, lowering the phone slowly, but not taking her eyes off me. Angry with you, she repeated as if testing the words. I nodded, shame crawling up my throat. Her face softened in a way only older people seem to know how to do, full of the kind of understanding that does not need explanations. She glanced toward the interior of my house, not to snoop, but to assess. There was nothing reassuring to see. No sound of parents, no signs of normal life. Just a thin 17-year-old girl clinging to the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Have you eaten?" she asked gently. I opened my mouth to answer, but only a strangled sound came out. That was enough. She said nothing for a moment. Then she disappeared from the doorway. My heart dropped until she returned with a reusable grocery bag, placing it just outside the threshold. "I cannot get inside, honey, but you can pull this in." It was a simple act, but my hands trembled as I reached for it. Inside were apples bread, a small container of soup, and a bottle of water. Food. Actual food. I almost cried at the sight. But before I could even thank her properly, my phone buzzed. A new email from my parents appeared on the screen. "Stop inviting outsiders into our private matters." I stared at the message, my stomach turning with something sharper than hunger. Mrs. Henderson watched my expression shift and asked softly, "They wrote something unkind, did they not?" I nodded again, unable to find my voice. She exhaled slowly as if making a private decision. "I have been hearing things," she said. "Sounds from your house. Things that did not feel right. And just now your door refusing to open." She shook her head, her jaw tightening. "Something is wrong here, Emily. Very wrong." I felt tears gather in my eyes. No one had ever said that out loud. No one had ever named it. She placed her palm against the door frame, not touching me, but close enough that I felt her warmth. "You are not in trouble, sweetheart. You are in danger. There is a difference." Her words cracked something open in me that had been sealed for years. Danger. Not overreacting. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Danger. She stood still for a moment, her expression firming with resolve. "I am going to call someone who knows what to do," she said. I shook my head again, instinctively terrified of consequences I had been trained to fear, but she continued, her tone gentle but immovable. "It will not be your parents I call. It will be someone who can help you, someone who will listen." I pressed my forehead against the door again, unable to argue. The thought of help was terrifying. The thought of no help was worse. As she stepped away from the door, promising she would return soon, I felt something shift around me. The house was no longer just silent. It was witness. And for the first time, someone else finally heard the truth it had been holding. It was late afternoon when Mrs. Henderson returned, her steps slow but purposeful as she crossed the small patch of lawn between our houses. I heard the soft crunch of her shoes through the kitchen window and forced myself to stand, despite the trembling in my legs. When she knocked again, it was not the tentative tap from earlier. It was firmer, steadier, as if she already knew she was not leaving without doing something. "Emily, sweetheart," she called. "I brought someone with me." My breath caught. Someone with her. I did not know if I should feel relieved or terrified. I moved toward the door, unlatching the chain, even though the keypad still barred the rest. Through the narrow crack, I saw a man standing slightly behind her, wearing a forest green jacket with our school district's emblem stitched on the chest. His eyes were kind but sharp, the sort of gaze that did not skim over pain but absorbed it. "Hello, Emily," he said softly. "It is Mr. Lewis from school." Hearing his name made something in me shift. He was the counselor I had seen once a year during mandatory check-ins, the one who always asked if I felt supported at home and never pushed when I shrugged. He stepped closer, leaning down so he was level with my eye line. "We were hoping you could open the door." I shook my head. "The code does not work. My parents changed it before they left." His expression tightened in a way he tried to hide but could not fully repress. "Locked in." He gestured toward the side window. "May I speak with you outside?" I nodded and hurried to the small living room window that slid open horizontally. It took all my remaining strength to push it upward, and when it finally budged, I had to grip the frame so I would not collapse under its weight. The cool air flooded in, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass from somewhere down the street. I stuck my head out, my breath shaky. Mr. Lewis stood a few feet away, his voice calm but anchored. Mrs. Henderson told me some things that concerned her. I looked at the ground ashamed, despite knowing none of this was my fault. "I heard you last night, honey," she added, her voice trembling. "You were crying." And the thud. I could not ignore that. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I fell, hit my head. Mr. Lewis stepped forward, worry flickering across his face. "Are you dizzy now? Are you nauseous?" I hesitated before nodding. His jaw clenched. "Emily, have you eaten today?" The question hit me like a blow. I felt tears sting my eyes as I whispered, "Not really. Not in a few days, I guess." His posture changed, becoming still in the way adults sometimes become when they are trying not to show anger at something deeply wrong. He glanced at the house, noticing its silence, its emptiness, its lack of movement, its locked door. "When was the last time you spoke to your parents?" he asked. "Yesterday," I said. "They were at dinner in London." He blinked once slowly. "And they left you here alone. For how long?" "A month." That word hung heavy in the air, like smoke. Mrs. Henderson pressed her hand to her chest as if hearing it physically hurt. "A month," she repeated, horrified. Mr. Lewis took a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking again. "Emily, I need to ask something important. Are you hurt anywhere besides your head and your hand?" I shook my head, then paused, unsure whether emotional wounds counted. He seemed to understand anyway. Slowly, he held up a clipboard. It had a simple welfare form attached to something used when a student needed checking on. I felt like a case file instead of a person, but for once that made me feel safer. He looked right into my eyes and asked the question no one had ever asked me honestly before. When was the last time someone asked if you were okay? My breath caught. I tried to answer, but the truth felt too heavy. So instead, my voice cracked and tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. He did not look away. He did not rush me. He simply nodded as if saying, "I see you," without using the words. "You deserve better than this, Emily." Hearing that broke something inside me, but in a way that let light in instead of darkness. I turned away from the window for a moment, wiping my face with the back of my wrist. When I looked back out, he was holding his phone. "Emily," he said carefully, "I need to contact Child Protective Services. This is not just unkind. It is unsafe. Your basic needs are not being met. You are injured. You are alone. You cannot open your own door. These are serious concerns." I felt panic rise instantly. "No, please, they will be furious. They will blame me." His tone remained gentle, but it did not bend. "I understand you are scared, but this is not your wrongdoing. Adults are supposed to care for you. They chose not to." He paused, letting that sink in. "I promise you, you are not in trouble." I exhaled shakily, my forehead pressed against the window frame as I whispered, "Will they take me away?" He replied, "Only from danger, not from people who care." Mrs. Henderson reached out and placed her hand over mine through the narrow opening of the window. "You are not alone anymore, sweetheart. Not ever again." I closed my eyes as the truth washed through me. This was not betrayal against my parents. It was rescue from them. As Mr. Lewis stepped aside to make the call, speaking in low, precise tones describing the situation, I realized the dot she had seen. The dot he had connected, the dot I had been too afraid to acknowledge, all led to the same truth. What was happening to me was not normal. It was not discipline. It was not independence. It was neglect. And someone finally saw it. The CPS caseworker arrived less than an hour after Mr. Lewis made the call, but the wait felt like an entire night squeezed into 60 heavy minutes. I sat by the window because it was the only place I could breathe without feeling the cameras watching my every move. My head still throbbed from the fall, and the dried blood on my hand pulsed with each heartbeat. I tried to keep my mind steady by reading the words I had written in my evidence log, but everything blurred together. When the white sedan pulled into the driveway, my stomach twisted so sharply I had to grip the windowsill. A woman stepped out holding a black binder in one hand and a tablet in the other. She walked with the calm focus of someone used to moving through chaos. Her voice was low but firm when she reached the side door where Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Lewis waited. "Emily," she said gently, "my name is Miss Carter. I am here to make sure you are safe." Her words made me feel both relieved and terrified. Safe. No one had used that word around me in years. I opened the sliding window again, the cool air rushing in. She crouched to meet my eyes, and for the first time since my parents left, I felt seen instead of supervised. "Can you open your door?" she asked. I shook my head. "The code is changed." She exchanged a look with the counselor, something quiet and serious. "All right," she said, "then we will talk here for now. Do you feel sick? Dizzy? Hurt?" Her questions came so quickly and professionally that I did not have time to filter my answers. "My head hurts. I fell last night. I have not eaten much. The card they gave me does not work." I could hear my own voice trembling as I said it, but she did not flinch or dismiss me. Instead, she lifted her tablet and took notes with fast, steady strokes. "Has anyone checked on you since they left?" "No." "Any money besides the $15 they left?" "No." "Any contact from them asking about your safety?" "They called last night. I said my chest tightening." "For what reason?" "They wanted to show me their dinner." Her expression hardened in a way that felt protective rather than judgmental. "And the cameras," she said quietly, "the ones you mentioned in the house." "There are 2 in my room." I whispered, "1 in the hallway, 1 in the living room." "They move." I saw her inhale slowly, the air catching in her lungs, the way it had caught in mine so many nights. She was trained to stay neutral, but even she could not hide the shift in her posture. "That is not standard monitoring for safety. That is surveillance." She motioned to Mr. Lewis. "We need to document everything." I felt the world tilt slightly as he hurried to his car and returned with a digital camera. He photographed the bruise on my temple, the cut on my hand, the nearly empty fridge, the broken pantry shelf, even the towel stained with dried blood. Ms. Carter directed him with quiet precision, her binder open beside her. Then she asked me the question I had been dreading and wanting all at once. "Emily, do you have any recordings or notes of what has happened since they left?" For a moment I went still. No one had ever asked for my truth before. I swallowed and nodded, reaching behind me to gather my notebooks. I passed them through the window one by one, my fingers shaking. She opened the evidence log first. I watched her eyes move across the first page. Day 1, parents gone, food nearly gone. Debit card inactive, no check-ins. Silence. She kept reading, her face tightening with each line. When she reached day 5, the page where my blood had smeared across the paper, she paused, her jaw set. "Thank you for writing all of this," she said quietly. "Most kids in situations like this do not have the strength to document their reality. It helps more than you know." My throat tightened. I had started writing because silence scared me, not because I thought anyone would care. She turned to the food log, scanning the entries. A handful of cereal, half a bruised apple. Nothing. 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 Then she lifted the emotion log. On several pages, my handwriting had slanted sharply, evidence of shaking hands and fear. Ms. Carter exhaled a long, slow breath. "Emily, this is not survival. This is captivity." The word hit me harder than hunger or exhaustion. Captivity. Not neglect. Not miscommunication. Captivity. She asked if she could see my phone. I hesitated before handing it over, but she handled it with care. I watched her face as she opened the videos. The audio of me whispering through tears filled the air. Day 3. I am still alone. The card does not work. I ate the last decent thing yesterday. If someone sees this, it means things got worse. I expected her to be stone-faced, but she blinked hard, as if fighting an instinct to reach through the screen and pull me out of those moments. She tapped a note on her tablet. "Emergency protective order. Immediate removal." I felt my breath catch. Removal meant I was leaving this house. Not someday. Today. She turned to me again, her tone softening. "Emily, you will not stay here another night." We are placing you with a temporary guardian until we complete a full investigation. You will be cared for, fed, seen." She glanced at Mrs. Henderson, and something warm flickered between them. The older woman nodded fiercely, almost fiercely enough to hide her relief. I did not realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. The fear I had been carrying curled inside me like a fist slowly releasing. Miss Carter reached through the open window, placing a gentle hand over mine. "You have done everything right. You told the truth. You survived. And now the evidence speaks for you." Behind me, the cameras buzzed again, turning their cold lenses toward the window as if eavesdropping on their own downfall. I did not look at them this time. They had watched me break. Now they would watch me leave. Safety did not come into my life with fireworks or warm music or any of the dramatic flourishes movies like to promise. It came quietly, almost awkwardly, like a stranger who knocked on the wrong door but stayed because someone finally realized they were needed. When Ms. Carter told me I would not spend another night in that house, my body reacted before my mind did. My knees went weak, and I had to grip the windowsill as though the ground itself had shifted. Leaving felt like stepping off a cliff, but staying felt like drowning. So when she said, "We are going to make sure you are somewhere safe tonight," I nodded, even though the word safe felt foreign in my mouth. She made a few quick calls, her tone firm and measured, then turned to Mrs. Henderson with a question that had more weight than it seemed. "Would you be willing to have Emily stay with you temporarily while we process the order?" The older woman did not hesitate. "Of course," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "She will be treated like family." Those words hit harder than the hunger or the fall or even my parents' betrayal. Family. I did not know what that word meant anymore, but hearing someone offer it freely made something warm unfurl inside me, something I had not felt since childhood. While Miss Carter finished her report outside, Mr. Lewis helped me gather what few belongings I needed. Because the door was still locked, he passed things through the open window: a hoodie, a pair of shoes, my notebooks, my phone charger, and a small stuffed fox I kept hidden in the back of my closet. He looked at it without judgment, handing it to me gently. "You do not need to pretend to be older than you are," he said softly. "You have been doing that your whole life." My throat tightened too much for me to speak. When everything was ready, Ms. Carter returned and asked if I felt strong enough to climb out the window. For a moment, the question embarrassed me like I was some kind of trapped child. Then I realized that was exactly what I was. With her help and Mr. Lewis steadying the frame, I slipped through the window and onto the grass. The air outside felt different than it had earlier. It felt real. It felt breathable. Mrs. Henderson wrapped an arm around my shoulders carefully, mindful of my bruises. "Let's get you inside, sweetheart," she whispered. "You are freezing." I had not even realized I was shaking. When we stepped into her home, the smell hit me first. Warm bread, clean laundry, the faint scent of lavender from a candle on the table. It smelled like comfort, like steadiness, like a place where someone asked how you were because they actually wanted the answer. She guided me to the kitchen table and set a bowl in front of me. It was just soup. Simple, warm, ordinary soup. But when I lifted the spoon and took the first bite, my entire body reacted. The heat spread through my chest, my stomach clenched, and for a second, I had to set the spoon down because tears blurred my vision. I had forgotten what it felt like for food to be more than survival, to be something that soothed instead of punished. "Take your time, dear," she said, not hovering, not rushing, just being there. I ate slowly at first, then faster once my body realized it was allowed to. When I finished, she gently slid a glass of water toward me. The gesture was so kind it hurt. After dinner, she showed me the guest room, a small space with soft lighting and a quilt folded neatly at the end of the bed. I ran my fingers over the blanket, unable to remember the last time anything had been prepared for me without an expectation attached. Sleeping here felt like sleeping on another planet. But even in the comfort of that room, something jittered inside me every time I heard a creak or a soft beep from her appliances. My body tensed like I was waiting for my parents' footsteps, waiting for a lecture, waiting for the cold judgment that always came before any chance at rest. Trauma does not understand new environments. It carries its own weather. At one point, I heard the front door open as her dog walker arrived, and my entire body went rigid before I remembered I was not in danger anymore. Still, when she came upstairs later and knocked softly, asking, "Are you settling in all right, dear?" I startled so hard that she immediately apologized even though she had done nothing wrong. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not mean to frighten you." I shook my head trying to smile even though my throat felt tight. "I am not used to people checking on me," I admitted. She sat on the edge of the bed, not too close, giving me space. "Well, get used to being cared for," she said gently. "It is long overdue." Her words settled into my chest like a weight, but a good one, the kind that anchored instead of crushing. The next morning, CPS visited her home to check the environment. They inspected the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom I was staying in. The caseworker nodded approvingly. "This is a safe placement," she confirmed. Those words should have brought comfort, and part of me felt relief, but another part of me felt a strange fear curl inside my ribs. Safety was unfamiliar. Safety felt like something I might ruin if I breathed wrong. Later that afternoon, Ms. Carter sat with me at the kitchen table and slid a printed timeline across the surface. "We are preparing for a formal meeting with your parents," she explained. "We have gathered the videos, the logs, the photos." She paused, looking at me with careful kindness. "Emily, they have not called you once since the night of the restaurant." I already knew that, but hearing it out loud turned something cold in my chest even colder. 17 days, she said softly. No contact, no concern, no effort. She tapped the stack of papers lightly. "This is not your burden anymore. We will handle the rest, but you will have a voice in that room if you choose to." I stared at the timeline at all the evidence of my loneliness laid out neatly in black ink. For the first time, I felt something that was not fear or anger or hunger. I felt the beginning of clarity. Safety still felt strange, but suddenly I wanted more of it. And suddenly I wanted them to see what they had created, not so they would feel guilty, but so they would face it. When Miss Carter stood to leave, she asked in her steady voice, "How are you feeling, Emily?" I answered honestly for the first time in years. "I am scared, but I am not alone." She smiled. That is the beginning of healing. And for once, I believed her. The days leading up to the meeting felt like standing on a train track, hearing the distant rumble of something massive approaching, but unable to tell how fast it was coming. Even in the quiet safety of Mrs. Henderson's home, the anticipation wrapped itself around my ribs like a tightening band. Every morning I woke before sunrise, my stomach knotted with a familiar tension, the kind I used to feel when I heard my parents' footsteps outside my bedroom door. Now the footsteps were gone, but their shadows remained. On the third morning, Miss Carter arrived carrying a thick folder heavier than anything I had ever seen related to my life. She set it on the kitchen table with a soft thud. "This is everything we have gathered," she said gently. "Documentation, statements, photos, video transcripts." It lay there like a verdict waiting to be read. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. It looked clinical, almost detached, yet every page inside was a piece of my reality that I had once been too afraid to name. She pulled out the first set of papers and spread them across the table. "Here is the timeline we created based on your logs. Day by day, event by event. You were incredibly thorough, Emily. You helped us more than you realize." I ran my fingers lightly over the pages, seeing my handwriting turned into something official, something that mattered. I never expected my notebooks to become evidence. I just needed a place to put the truth so it did not swallow me whole. Now the truth was going to face the people who had caused it. Later that afternoon, Mr. Lewis stopped by after school, still wearing his counselor badge clipped neatly to his jacket. His presence steadied me in ways I had not expected. He took the seat across from me, folding his hands. "Tomorrow we will meet with your parents," he said. "The CPS supervisor, Ms. Carter, myself, and you, if you feel ready." The question lingered in the air. Was I ready? Some part of me whispered no. The part that remembered every time my mother's voice hardened or my father's eyes narrowed. The part that had learned to freeze instead of speak. But another part of me, The part that had written page after page in those notebooks felt something else rise quietly inside. "I want to be there," I said, my voice steadier than expected. "I want them to see me, not just the evidence. Me." He nodded slowly, pride flickering across his face. "Then, let us prepare." We spent the next hour going through possible questions, not rehearsing answers but practicing boundaries, something I had never been allowed to have. "If they interrupt you," he said, pause. "Look to me or to Ms. Carter. You do not owe them explanations beyond the truth. If they blame you, redirect to the facts. If they attempt to minimize the situation, we will step in. You are not defending yourself. You are describing your experience." His guidance felt like armor being fitted piece by piece onto someone who had fought too long without any. At one point, he stopped and studied me with that calm, perceptive expression he always carried. "Emily," he said carefully, "I need you to understand something before tomorrow. Your parents may try to twist the narrative. They may cry or make promises or insist they were teaching you a lesson. That is common in cases like this. Emotional manipulation is powerful, especially when it comes from people who raised you. But you are not responsible for how they react. You are responsible only for telling the truth." I nodded, though a cold fear rippled down my spine. I knew my parents' tactics better than anyone. They weaponized disappointment, used silence as punishment, and turned guilt into a leash. But now there would be witnesses. Now there would be people who did not look away. After he left, I went upstairs to the guest room and opened my notebooks. I reread every entry, slowly letting the words sink into me. Day 1, parents gone, food nearly gone, debit card inactive. Silence. Day 5, cut hand, blood, no help. Day 7, collapsed, cameras watched. They did nothing. As I turned each page, I felt my breathing steady, not because the memories hurt less, but because I was no longer holding them alone. When I closed the final notebook, I realized something important. I was not preparing to confront them. I was preparing to stop being afraid of them. That night, Mrs. Henderson cooked dinner again, something simple but warm, and insisted I take the quiet moments to rest. But sleep did not come easily. I lay awake for hours watching the moonlight stretch across the ceiling, imagining what tomorrow would look like. Would my mother glare at me? Would my father roll his eyes? Would they call me dramatic, ungrateful, disobedient? Every version of the scene played in my mind, each one ending the same way, with me shrinking. I sat up abruptly, refusing to practice defeat in my own head. I stood and walked to the small mirror across the room. My own reflection stared back at me, thinner than before, bruised, tired, but unbroken. "You survived them," I whispered to myself. "You can face them." The next morning came fast. Too fast. I dressed in jeans and a clean sweater Mrs. Henderson had folded for me. She fussed gently with my hair before we left, then pulled me into a soft hug that I did not know how to return properly. When she let go, her eyes shined. "You are braver than you know, sweetheart." As we walked toward my old house, the air felt heavy, the sky overcast, as though the world itself understood what was coming. When we stepped inside with CPS, the house looked the same as it had the night I collapsed. The cold kitchen, the broken pantry, the frozen silence. But this time I was not alone. On the table, Ms. Carter placed the thick folder of evidence. On top, she set my notebook opened to the first page. Day 1, they left, I did not. Something inside me clicked into place. I was ready. The sound of the front door unlocking was somehow louder than I remembered, as if the house itself had been holding its breath for weeks, and finally exhaled. I stood beside the kitchen counter with Ms. Carter and Mr. Lewis on either side of me, the evidence folder open on the table like a silent witness. The air felt cold despite the heater running a familiar chill. I used to think belonged to Michigan winters, but now recognized as something my parents carried in with them. When the door swung open, they entered laughing mid-conversation, their arms full of shopping bags from London. Their clothes looked different, brighter, more expensive than anything they had ever bought for me. My mom's hair was freshly styled, and my dad wore a designer jacket I knew cost more than anything in my closet combined. Their voices filled the hallway, cheerful and oblivious, until they stepped into the kitchen and saw us. The laughter died instantly. My mother's smile collapsed first, folding into something tight and suspicious. My father's brow furrowed, not in worry, but in annoyance, like someone finding strangers sitting in their reserved seats. "What is this?" my mother demanded, her eyes darting from me to the caseworker to the stack of documents. Her gaze sharpened when she noticed the open page of my notebook. "Emily, why is our private business being aired out like this?" My father stepped forward, his tone clipped. "Someone better start explaining." Ms. Carter kept her posture calm and neutral. "Mr. and Mrs. Hart," she said evenly, "we need to discuss concerns regarding Emily's safety while you were away." My father gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Concerns? Really?" "We went on a trip. Teenagers stay home alone all the time. That is part of growing up." My mother nodded quickly, eager to bolster his narrative. "Emily is nearly 18. She needs to learn independence. We gave her freedom." Her emphasis on the word freedom made my stomach twist. Ms. Carter did not react outwardly, but she opened the binder and placed the debit card transaction summary on the table. "According to bank records," she said calmly, "you left Emily with an inactive card." My mother waved a hand dismissively. "She probably used it wrong. We left her cash, too." My father leaned on the counter, his tone edging toward superiority. "Kids exaggerate. You cannot take everything they say at face value." Without speaking, Ms. Carter slid my food log forward. Then the emotion log. Then the printed stills from the camera footage showing me collapsing in the kitchen. My parents both went still. Not guilty still. Defensive still. My father straightened his jaw, tightening. "Where did you get these? Those cameras are for security." That was when the anger in Miss Carter's voice appeared subtle but unmistakable. "Cameras inside a minor's bedroom constitute illegal surveillance in this state." My mother's face drained of color. "Bedroom." She glanced at my father sharply. "You said you put them in the hallway," he shot back. "I put them where I needed to monitor things." Her eyes widened, betrayal flickering between them. He turned away from her and focused on me instead, pointing a rigid finger in my direction. "You invited these people into our home? You are making a spectacle out of nothing. You always were dramatic." The familiar sting of those words hit, but this time they did not land the same way. Before I could speak, Mr. Lewis stepped forward. "Actually, Sir Emily did not call us. A mandated reporter contacted CPS after observing signs of neglect. Another reporter is present in this room." My father's glare cut toward the counselor, dark and simmering. "Are you accusing us of abuse?" Ms. Carter answered before anyone else could. "We are stating the documented facts. For 17 days of your trip, you did not call, text, or send money to your minor child. You left her without access to food. She suffered a head injury without medical attention. You changed the home entry code without providing it to her. You monitored her via cameras, including in her private space." She drew in a deep breath. "These actions meet definitions of child neglect, emotional abuse, coercive control, and unlawful surveillance." My mother pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "No," she whispered, "this is being blown out of proportion. Emily, tell them. Tell them it was not like that." She took a step toward me, her voice rising in panic. "Sweetheart, we did this for you, to teach you responsibility. You know that." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the moment I had rehearsed in my mind for days, but standing here facing their eyes, their voices, their guilt, wrapped in excuses, every instinct inside me screamed to shrink, to fold, to take the blame so the storm would pass. But there were people beside me now, people who would not let the storm swallow me. So I inhaled slowly and spoke. "You were not teaching me anything. You left me with almost no food. You left me without a way to leave the house. You did not check on me. Not once." My father scoffed loudly. "She is exaggerating. She always exaggerates." I took another breath. "You watched me collapse on a camera, and you did nothing." That silence in the room afterward felt like a door closing. "A final one?" My mother shook her head rapidly, tears streaming now. "Emily, please, they will take you away from us. Say something to help us. Please. My voice felt steady in a way it had not felt in my entire life. You are not losing me. You already left me. The words landed with the force of a shattering truth. My father looked stunned for the first time. My mother crumpled against the counter, sobbing into her hands. Ms. Carter closed the binder. Based on the evidence, she said firmly, custody is suspended effective immediately pending court review. Emily will not remain in your care. My parents' world collapsed in front of me, but for once I did not feel responsible for holding it together. I stepped back toward the doorway, toward the caseworker, toward the people who had seen me even when I could not see myself. As we walked out of the house, I did not look back. I did not need to. The truth was behind me now, written, spoken, undeniable. The CPS conference room was colder than any courtroom I had ever imagined, sterile and bright, with humming fluorescent lights that made everything feel too sharp, too exposed, too real. I sat in the chair closest to the wall because it felt safest there, with Mrs. Henderson on my right and Mr. Lewis on my left, forming a quiet, protective barrier I had never known I was allowed to have. Across from us, my parents sat stiffly, their designer clothes out of place, against the government-issued chairs, their faces pale from a mixture of panic exhaustion and the sudden realization that the narrative they had clung to for years no longer protected them. When the supervisor entered, a woman with silver hair pulled neatly into a bun and a voice that carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades confronting hard truths, the room shifted. She sat at the head of the table, opened a folder identical to the one Miss Carter had brought to the house, and folded her hands. We are here to review the findings regarding Emily Hart and determine the appropriate protective measures moving forward, she began. My parents exchanged a glance, the kind that always used to intimidate me into silence, but today it only made me sit taller. Ms. Carter summarized the case first, her tone steady, professional, unwavering. She detailed the lack of communication, the non-existent food supply, the inactive debit card, the changed door code, the visible injuries, and the illegal bedroom surveillance. With each fact, she read my parents' defenses cracked a little more. By the time she reached the transcript of the call where my mother told me starving teaches responsibility, my mother's hands were shaking visibly. My father's jaw worked tightly, as if he was trying to chew the words before they landed. Then the supervisor asked the question the entire room had been waiting for. Mr. and Mrs. Hart, do you dispute any of the evidence presented? My father leaned forward, gripping the table with enough force to make it creak. Yes, he said. Or rather, we dispute the interpretation. Emily exaggerates. She always has. My mother jumped in quickly. She has a history of being dramatic. She could have eaten. She chose not to. She could have gone outside. She chose not to. We were trying to teach her independence. It was supposed to be a confidence-building exercise. The supervisor raised a hand, silencing them with one small motion. You left a minor child without reliable access to food, medical care, communication, or safe shelter. That is not independence. That is neglect. My mother's voice cracked as she tried again. We love her. We were trying to help her grow. I reached for the notebook in front of me, the one they had ignored for years. Day 6. I said quietly, reading aloud, my vision blurry, my body shaking. I collapsed in the kitchen. The camera moved, but no one came. The silence after that felt heavier than any sound I had ever heard. My father scoffed. She fell because she was careless. She knows better than to play the victim. Mr. Lewis's voice sharpened for the first time. She nearly lost consciousness, he said, leaning forward. She suffered a head injury. You watched and did nothing. My parents did not answer. They could not. The truth had cornered them. The supervisor tapped her pen once, not impatiently, but decisively, as if marking a moment the way a judge marks a ruling. Emily, she said, turning her attention to me, is there anything you wish to say before we continue? My throat tightened, but this time the tension did not silence me. I looked at my parents directly, really looking at them maybe for the first time, without fear clouding my vision. You left me, I said. Not for a day, not for a weekend, for weeks, without food, without money, without checking if I was alive. You locked the door. You watched the cameras. You laughed on video calls while I was starving. My mother's face crumpled as if the words physically struck her. My father looked away first. And when I needed help, I continued, "You told me to stop being dramatic." My voice stayed steady even though my hands trembled in my lap. The supervisor nodded once, acknowledging the truth of my testimony before turning back to my parents. Her tone remained calm, but there was no softness left. Based on the evidence presented, Child Protective Services has determined that Emily was subjected to severe neglect, emotional abuse, coercive control, and illegal surveillance. Effective immediately, your custodial rights are suspended pending judicial review. My mother gasped a small, sharp sound that seemed to deflate her entire posture. "We can fix this," she whispered frantically toward my father. "Tell them we can fix this." My father's voice trembled with anger he could not channel. "This is insane. We are her parents. You cannot just take her away." The supervisor remained unmoved. The state of Michigan is obligated to protect minors from harm, including harm inflicted by parents. Until a family court judge determines otherwise, Emily will remain in the care of an approved guardian. My mother's eyes filled with tears, brimming with a desperation I had never seen from her. "Emily," she pleaded. "Sweetie, say something. Tell them you want to come home. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." My breath shook, but my resolve did not. "I am not going back," I said quietly. "Not to that house. Not to that silence. Not to those cameras." My father pounded the table once, a useless and fading display of control. "She is brainwashed," he snapped. "You people filled her head with lies." The supervisor closed the folder with a finality that felt almost ceremonial. "The lies she said were the ones you told yourselves. The truth is documented." At the end of the meeting, my parents sat frozen, stunned, their power dissolved by the weight of their own actions. As I stood to leave with Miss Carter, my mother reached out as if to touch my arm, but her hand stopped inches away, trembling. Her voice cracked into a whisper. "Emily, please." I looked at her not with anger, but with something colder, clearer, stronger. "You did not lose me today," I said softly. "You lost me the moment you decided my survival was optional." My father closed his eyes, his face collapsing into something that might have been regret, or might have been fear. I did not stay to decipher it, because for the first time, the verdict of the room was not against me. It was for me. The courtroom did not look like the dramatic chambers in movies, no dark wood ceilings or echoing footsteps or marble floors that swallowed sound. Instead, it smelled faintly of paper and recycled air lit by soft fluorescent lighting with rows of chairs that squeaked any time someone shifted. It was smaller, quieter, and somehow far more intimidating because everything inside it was real. Nothing staged for effect, nothing exaggerated for drama. This was the room where my life would be examined piece by piece, where adults in authority would debate what it meant to be safe, and where my parents would finally face consequences that no vacation, no curated image, no dismissive laugh could erase. I sat at a table beside Miss Carter and the attorney assigned to represent my interests, a woman named Ms. Doyle, who spoke in a calm tone that reminded me of steady rain. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their own attorney, a man with slicked back hair and a suit that probably cost more than the groceries I had lived on for months. They looked smaller than I remembered, dwarfed by the weight of the room and the file folders stacked in front of the judge. When the judge entered, everyone rose, and for a moment my knees trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the enormity of being seen. Not watched on a camera. Seen. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver-framed glasses and an expression both warm and uncompromising, began by reviewing the case before her. "This matter concerns allegations of severe neglect, emotional abuse, coercive control, and unlawful surveillance regarding the minor Emily Hart." Her voice echoed just enough to make the words hang in the air like a verdict long before she delivered one. My parents shifted their attorney, whispering hurried instructions, but nothing could change the evidence stacked across the judge's desk. The video screens lit up as Ms. Doyle stood. "Your Honor, with permission, we would like to begin with the audio-visual documentation recorded by Emily during the period of neglect." The judge nodded and the first clip played. There I was on day 3, sitting on the kitchen floor, my face blotchy and pale, my voice shaking as I whispered that the food was gone, that the card did not work, that no one had checked on me. The entire courtroom went silent except for my recorded breathing. My mother pressed her fist against her mouth. My father stared at the table as though he could burst it into flames with shame or anger or both. The second clip showed the moment I tried to stand and stumbled against the counter, the faint sound of the camera clicking as it zoomed in, the sound of my breath hitching before the screen went black. I felt the tension spike sharply across the room. Even the court stenographer paused for a beat before continuing to type. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Please replay that segment." The moment looped and my parents flinched like they had been struck. Next, Ms. Doyle presented printed photographs taken by CPS, the empty refrigerator, the nearly barren pantry, the expired food, the unopened medical supplies, and the smart lock code logs showing multiple failed attempts by me to exit the house. The judge flipped through each page, slowly, methodically, her expression tightening. Then she looked at my parents. "Would either of you like to explain the conditions documented here?" My father cleared his throat, attempting dignity that no longer fit. "We wanted her to be independent," he said. "She is 17, not a child. It was supposed to be a learning experience." The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. "A learning experience," she repeated, "without food supervision or the ability to leave the home." My mother leaned forward desperately. "She could have called someone," she insisted. "She makes it sound worse than it was. She always dramatizes things. We were gone for less than 3 weeks when CPS intervened. It was not as long as they claim, but the judge did not soften. Mrs. Hart, according to your airline itinerary, you planned to be gone 34 days. According to phone logs, you contacted your daughter exactly once. And according to your own emails, you told her starving teaches responsibility." The entire room seemed to freeze around that sentence. My mother looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. My father shook his head, muttering that it had been a joke taken out of context. The judge turned her attention to the witnesses. Mr. Lewis approached the stand first. He spoke respectfully but with a firmness that made every word feel anchored in truth. He told them about my trembling hands when he arrived at the cold kitchen, the exhaustion in my voice, the way I had tried to downplay everything, even as the evidence contradicted me. When Mrs. Henderson testified, her voice quivered with emotion. She described seeing me through the cracked door, pale, hungry, terrified, too afraid to ask for help because I did not want to disappoint the people who should have protected me. More than once, the judge glanced toward me with something like sorrow. When it was my turn, I stood on legs that wanted to shake and walked to the witness stand. My oath sounded oddly loud in my ears. I spoke slowly, carefully, not because I rehearsed anything, but because every memory felt sharp and bright and unbearably honest. I told them about the cameras, the hunger the night I collapsed, the way my mother dismissed every plea, the way my father mocked every fear. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply told the truth. When I finished, the silence was heavy enough to feel. My parents looked at me as though they were seeing a stranger, or maybe seeing their daughter clearly for the first time. Finally, the judge closed the file. "I have heard enough. Mr. and Mrs. Hart. The evidence demonstrates a pattern of neglect and emotional harm that cannot be dismissed as poor judgment or miscommunication. Therefore, I am ordering supervised visitation, only mandatory counseling completion of a parental responsibility program, and a 1-year prohibition on surveillance of any kind. Custody will not be restored until compliance is demonstrated and the court determines it is safe." My mother broke into tears, whispering no over and over. My father's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. I felt no triumph, only a quiet, steady certainty. The truth had finally spoken for itself. The judge looked at me last. "Emily, you showed extraordinary courage in documenting your experience. Because of your honesty, you are safe now." Safe. The word settled into my chest like a promise I had never been given until this moment. As I left the courtroom with Miss Carter and Mrs. Henderson, I did not look back. I did not need to. The truth no longer lived behind me. It lived in front of me. I used to think healing would feel like fireworks or sunlight or some moment of triumphant music, but it did not arrive with anything dramatic. It came slowly in small breaths, in quiet mornings, in the soft clink of a mug that Mrs. Henderson handed me while the house still smelled like lavender and warm bread. The first week after the court ruling felt unreal, like I was living inside someone else's life, moving through a world where people asked if I slept well, if I had enough to eat, if I wanted seconds, if I felt safe. Safe. That word echoed inside me again and again, like it was teaching my ribs how to expand for the first time. Mrs. Henderson had set up the guest room with new sheets and a lamp that glowed warm instead of harsh, and she told me gently that I could decorate it however I wanted, that it was my space now. Not borrowed, not conditional. At first, I woke up at every sound, the creak of the hallway, the thump of a closing cabinet, the distant rumble of the mail truck. My body still braced for footsteps outside my door, or the quiet mechanical hum of a camera adjusting its angle. More than once, I woke gasping, reaching for my evidence log as if I needed to prove I existed. But slowly, the panic softened. Slowly, the house began to feel like a place where the doors stayed unlocked because people trusted each other, where the kitchen was open to anyone who was hungry, where no one monitored anyone else's footsteps. I learned how to cook eggs without burning them, how to make pasta without shaking, how to breathe without feeling like I needed permission. School felt different too. Not easier exactly, but safer. Mr. Lewis checked in with me regularly, not out of pity but respect, and he encouraged me to join the after-school writing club, reminding me that my words had already changed my life once. I started carrying my notebook not because I needed evidence anymore, but because I wanted to write things I had never been allowed to feel before, things like I laughed at lunch today, or I finished homework early, or I felt calm. One afternoon while I was helping Mrs. Henderson water her garden, she said something that rearranged the air around us. You know, Emily, healing does not mean pretending nothing happened. It means choosing to build a life that is bigger than what hurt you. I did not answer right away, but the words settled into me like roots. Meanwhile, my parents sent long messages through the court-monitored email system. My mother's words spilled across the screen in paragraphs filled with excuses, apologies, reasons, promises, and rewrites of history she desperately wanted me to accept. She wrote that she missed me, that everything came from stress, that she never meant to hurt me, that I misunderstood their intentions, that she wanted things to go back to normal. But normal was a house with locked doors and cameras. A house where hunger was a lesson, where silence was a weapon, where love had conditions I could never meet. My father's messages were shorter, stiff, and formal, as if he were applying for a position he did not know how to qualify for. He wrote that he hoped I was well, that he was cooperating with the court's requirements, that he wanted to rebuild trust, though he did not specify how. Sometimes I read their messages twice, not because I believed them, but because I was trying to understand how two people could love the idea of a child more than the child herself. CPS told me I did not owe them forgiveness, contact, or access. Forgiveness is a choice, they said gently, not a responsibility. I thought about that for days. Forgiveness was not a door I had to open. It was a boundary I had the right to guard. By the time the second court review came, I felt steadier. I wore a clean sweater Mrs. Henderson bought me and tied my hair back the way she said made my eyes look strong. My parents sat at their table again, smaller than ever, worn down by mandatory therapy and supervised visits they believed were beneath them. I did not speak much, but when the judge asked if I felt safe where I was living, I answered clearly, yes. For the first time in years, yes. Afterward, we left the courthouse and I did not look back. My life was no longer behind me. It was somewhere ahead, something I could shape with my own hands, not something controlled by someone else's expectations. That winter, I helped decorate Mrs. Henderson's tree, carefully placing ornaments shaped like tiny houses and stars. When we finished, she handed me one shaped like an open book. "This one is yours," she said. "It means new chapters." I held it in my hand, feeling the smooth edges, realizing I had never been given anything symbolic before. Nothing that hinted I had a future, rather than a function. I hung it on the branch closest to eye level. Sometimes I recorded videos again, not to document danger, but to document growth. Day 95. I said into the camera, once I made soup without cutting myself. I did my homework early. I laughed twice. I feel like I exist. I saved that clip the way some people save photographs as proof that surviving was only the beginning. On New Year's Eve, when midnight approached, Mrs. Henderson and I stood on her porch, wrapped in blankets, while fireworks bloomed across the sky. She glanced at me softly. Any resolutions for the new year, dear? I thought about fear and hope and the strange, fragile thing called healing. Finally, I said, I want to build a life where I am not apologizing for being alive. She smiled a warm, proud smile that reached her eyes. I think you are already doing that. Later that night in my room, I opened my old evidence log one last time. I did not cry. I did not shake. I simply wrote the sentence that had been pressing against my ribs for months. Forgiveness is not the same as access. Then I closed the notebook and placed it gently at the back of my drawer. It was not my burden anymore. It was simply part of my history. As I turned off the light, a quiet certainty settled over me. My parents had returned to a life they never saw coming. One where the truth had taken root, where consequences had grown tall, where the daughter they once monitored now stood beyond their reach, not out of rebellion, but out of survival. And as I lay in the soft quiet of the room that was finally mine, I whispered the words I once said in fear, now reborn in strength. If the truth scares them, it means they finally saw what I lived through, and I no longer needed them to look away. If you stayed with Emily through her journey, then you already understand that stories like hers are not fiction to far too many people. They are warnings, mirrors, and quiet truths that rarely get spoken out loud. Maybe you grew up in a home where silence was expected, where love came with conditions, where the people who were supposed to protect you taught you instead to shrink. Maybe you learned how to survive before you ever learned how to feel safe. And if any part of Emily's story felt familiar, even in the smallest way, then hear this clearly. What happened to you mattered. What you felt mattered. What you survived mattered. You were never dramatic for needing food, for wanting comfort, for hoping someone would check that you were okay. You were a child who deserved safety, tenderness, and boundaries that protected rather than controlled. Healing does not come from pretending the past was less painful than it was. It comes from naming things honestly and choosing day by day to build a life that does not repeat old harm. And to every viewer who watched this story, not because they lived it, but because they care enough to witness someone else's truth, your empathy is part of the healing too. It reminds survivors everywhere that their voices are not echoing into emptiness. So let me ask you the question Emily learned to ask herself. If you had been left alone with $15 and a locked door, would you have stayed silent to protect someone else's reputation, or would you have chosen your own survival? Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what part of this story stayed with you. Your voice might be exactly what someone needs to hear tonight.